Hey there, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of the Called to Be Whole Connect group. Thank you for being a part. Thank you for joining in with me as we go through these 10 weeks. Invite friends, invite guys at work, anybody that you know to our next activity. It's going to be a great time. We're going to have a lot of fun. So invite people, feel free to bring them out. So our story this week, we're going to look at Matthew 8:24, and this story is actually also recorded in Luke 4, but we're going to look mainly at Matthew. So our main verse for this week is Matthew 8:24, and this verse says, "And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep." So this scripture, this verse, of course, taken out of context, can mean a whole lot of different things. So we're going to look at what this story is and where it's taken place. So this story is taking place on the Sea of Galilee. This story is the story of the disciples waking Jesus up in the middle of a storm on the sea and Jesus calming the wind and the waves. So a little bit of background. In Matthew 8, we see that Jesus has just completed what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. So there are a few different ideas around this collection of teachings, but many Christians have held to the idea that this was a single sermon that was delivered all at once. And this is a good way of looking at it, and that's why it's called the Sermon on the Mount, because it resembles the teachings that would be delivered in a sermon. And Jesus was teaching to a multitude of people. That's why he went up on the side of the mountain to be able to speak to them and teach them all of the things in these several chapters of Matthew. And so immediately after Jesus concludes this sermon, Matthew records that Jesus went down off the mountain. And as he went down off the mountain, he traveled and he went into Capernaum, where he was going to rest and be served. Well, as he's going towards the city, he actually comes across several people, and naturally the multitude follows him as well. And so as he's going towards Capernaum, Matthew records that Jesus heals a leper on the way into the city. And also, as he gets into the city, before he can get to Peter's house where they're going to be staying, where they're going to be served, he comes across a Roman centurion. And the centurion asks Jesus to heal his daughter. And so Jesus does this miracle for the centurion because of his faith and heals his daughter. So now when Jesus comes, he finally comes to the house of Peter. He finally comes to who we know is to become this apostle of Jesus. And Jesus, as he comes into this house, turns out that Peter's mother-in-law is sick and is ill and in bad health. So Jesus heals his mother-in-law. And when he heals his mother-in-law, the Bible says that then they sat and the mother-in-law serves the company, serves the group that is in the house. So Jesus has done a lot here. He's given a whole sermon. He's had this public speaking. He's talked and taught to this multitude of people. He's been followed by this multitude of people back into the city. He's done 3-4 miracles that are recorded in the Bible. Could have done more. We don't know exactly, but he's just doing that much stuff. That's a lot. I mean, I know I would be exhausted just even after giving a sermon or public speaking at all. I'm exhausted. I'm wore out. Matthew continues on and says that to add to this exhaustion, the multitudes continued to bring people to the house where he was at. They continued to bring those that were sick, those that needed healing. They did not stop bringing them to Jesus because they wanted them to be healed, because they knew and they had faith that Jesus could heal them. And I can just see Jesus telling the disciples as they're sitting in the house being like, y'all, this just ain't work. I need some rest. I need a little bit of time to rest and recover. I want to heal these people. I want to do all this, but I need some rest. I need to get away for a bit. Let's go to the other side of the lake, and then we'll continue from there. So that's the Brandon version that I see playing out in my head. And Matthew records that Jesus gave them the command to let's go to the other side. And so the disciples brought a boat, and they all got into that boat, and they set out for the other side of the lake, or the Sea of Galilee. And so whenever they got into the boat, Jesus conked out. He started catching some Z's. He started trying to catch up on his sleep as they were going and as they were traveling. I mean, the gentle rocking of the waves, you got to imagine how that would probably be kind of nice, right? A few things that we can gather from this story, a few things that we can look at in our lives that we want to apply and we want to look at as we start getting into this idea of wholeness for our lives and the wholeness for our minds, our bodies, our spirit. Our health is not just our physical fitness. Our health is a whole lot of other things. Our health is spiritual health. It's psychological health. It's emotional health. All of these things come into account when we look at our wellness as Christians and as humans even. This goes hand in hand with our physical health. Our wellness impacts our entire lives. We are combined beings. Each one of these things are interconnected, and our psychological health is going to impact our physical health, and our emotional health is going to impact our spiritual health. And all these things have ways that they are intertwined and that they play off each other. It's a bit like a plumbing system that has a leak. So if you've got a plumbing system that has a leak, that leak may affect the toilet that's in one room, and it may affect a shower that's in another room. The shower and the toilet are both affected, but they may be affected differently. But the leak is still affecting them both. You could fix the shower and you could fix the toilet, but it may just make the leak that is farther up the line worse. It may actually make that hole or whatever's leaking leak worse if you fix those other two things. Or it's like a bug that's in a piece of computer code. This portion of code is dependent on other sections, and there are other sections of the code that are dependent on it. But the bug in this one piece might not be the actual problem. You may need to adjust how the section before it's written, or you may need to adjust the sections after it and how they depend on that portion. They all work together. Each portion of that code works together to produce something else. And our bodies are much the same way. The difference between our bodies and code, though, is that our bodies have a way of compensating for other parts when there's an issue in a particular part. So there's also the idea of awareness. And I want to bring awareness up because I think it's important to be aware as men and as just humans, really. I once had a pastor friend tell me that awareness is incredibly important, and I've held on to it since that time. In Madden football, the video game Madden football, there's an attribute when you're creating a new player, when you're creating a new character that you're about to play through career mode with, that you can give a certain amount of different attributes to that player. There's an attribute that's called awareness. This attribute of awareness, it can be overlooked. If it's overlooked and the player has the higher levels of strength or agility or quickness, then the player can be pretty good. But this pastor friend told me that he always maxes out this ability trait of awareness because if you really invest into that awareness attribute, that player is going to be better in the game than any of the others. That player is going to be able to play almost any position. He's going to be able to do so many other things than those that are maxed out with strength and agility. Because knowing what we are experiencing is the main foundation to our health, to knowing our levels of stress, to knowing when we need to rest. It's our main foundation to all of our wholeness and wellness. So according to Dr. Clay Jackson, who is a pastor and a physician in Tennessee, wellness involves personal growth, which is the ability to develop one's potential. It requires self-acceptance, which is having a positive attitude towards oneself. Wellness is also autonomy. It's the self-determination, it's independence, it's self-regulation of our behaviors. Wellness involves our purpose in life. It includes our goals, our sense of direction, and things like that. Wellness is our ability to choose or influence our own environments. And it's also strong interpersonal relationships. All of these things, these 6 things, influence our wellness. So tying all these together, if we look at these 6 areas of wellness, we may be able to see areas that we're deficient. We may be able to see, as we work on our awareness of these areas, as we work on our awareness of the factors in our life that cause us to maybe have a low sense of interpersonal relationships or a low sense of purpose in life. As we begin to look at this stuff and be aware of these things, we can start to realize which items are leaking. We can begin to see where that bug is in that computer code that we need to adjust and we need to change. And we can begin to work to change those things to build more whole lives, to build lives that are more full of purpose, that are more full of autonomy and self-acceptance, and that we strive towards personal growth. We can begin to look at all these things and to see ourselves as a whole individual. So another factor to look at in all of those things is our stress. So stress is a really big thing. People talk about it a lot. They'll say, I'm stressed out, or I'm really stressed because of all these other things in life, or something's just stressing me out. Or stress is very real in our lives, and stress encompasses a lot of different things. It's interesting. My background is actually in engineering and in kind of the sciences, and stress in engineering is the amount of force that's applied to a certain area. So if you're applying a force to an area, that stress is the measure of what's being applied. And a lot of times it's used in relation to whenever something breaks, to how much stress can a certain material take before it actually breaks. So that's not a really good thing, because we don't want to break. We don't want ourselves to break. We don't want to find that tipping point. But stress is actually a natural reaction that serves us in time of crisis and need, but it must be managed. We have to be able to manage our stress. So similarly to our first story of Jesus, where he works and he's teaching and he's healing people and then gets in the boat and falls asleep, we also see Jesus withdrawing from those around him at times throughout his ministry. We see him drawing away and rising early to go pray, or we see him withdrawing away to a desolate place or to a mountain. And so that brings us to the question of, what is stress? What is good stress? Is there such a thing as bad stress? What are these things? So stress in our bodies is a part of our defensive system. It's what gives us the ability to fight or to flight. And Archibald Hart, a psychologist, actually adds a third thing to that popular fight or flight. He actually adds fight, fright, or flight. It's that fear factor that causes us to freeze, that stress leads to. That stress gives us the ability to flee. It gives us the ability to fight, or it gives us a debilitating fear that we can't really do anything. And so stress can exhilarate us. It can improve how we operate. That's a lot of times we can become overly dependent on this stress mechanism to push us to operate better. It can be that spark that us procrastinators feel is deadline mode.
I must activate deadline mode. Yeah, deadline mode. Deadline mode saves us once more.
There's an argument that says that this stress response was created to help us overcome challenging obstacles that may be necessary for our survival. So a big old lion comes up against you, and that stress comes up, that response rises up, and you're like, okay, I got to run really fast, a long ways. And so that stress helps you to do that and to survive, to get away from the threat. But this response at times in that way includes the release of adrenaline. But we can't operate in this mode continuously. Unfortunately, we can't operate always at this high level of intensity, at this high level of adrenaline-infused ability. It would be nice to operate like that all the time, but in our bodies and our minds and in our spirits, we have to have some rest. So with that, it's super important to pay attention to our rest. It's important to pay attention to our sleep and our energy and how that's being revived through rest. So there's a lot of research out there on sleep. And there's a lot of things that show that sleep is restorative for our brains and our bodies. There's a lot of competing research even as to what exactly is needed for the proper amount of sleep. Some studies will say 5 to 6 hours is the needed amount of sleep, and some studies will say 8, 9, or even 10 or 11. There's a lot of different things that are out there that say you need to have such and such amount of sleep. But really, that's very hard to determine how much sleep everybody needs to get. So in reality, it's important to pay attention of how much sleep you need to get, how much sleep is essential for you. And often it's difficult because we have trouble identifying how we feel when we wake up. We have trouble identifying if we're groggy or if we have slept too much or if we've had too much caffeine the day before. There's a lot of factors that go into determining how we feel. And in the morning, It's really hard when we wake up to just notice and pay attention to how we feel, or it's hard to know how we feel before we drift off to sleep. Sleep is so essential because it provides rest for our body primarily. It's also a huge reset, though, for our mind and our spirit. Rest is way more than sleeping, too. It's a lot of sleeping is a really big part of it, and it's super important, but rest is also getting away from sleep. It's getting away from the things that are pulling on us, that are taking our energy away from us. Rest is a time when we sort of push life's demands aside for a moment and we remember who we really are. The author Ryan Franklin even suggests in writing on sleep for Christian leaders, he suggests that rest could just be a few minutes throughout our day, getting away from the craziness and setting a few minutes aside to recenter ourselves. Sleep restores our physical energy, but this deeper rest also restores both our spiritual and our emotional energy. All of these things are essential to our lives. They're essential to living whole lives. They're essential to living lives that are full of purpose. So we see in our story, as we go back to where we left Jesus, he was asleep in the boat on the lake. We see that Jesus often went away for spiritual and emotional rest in prayer. Exodus even gives the command prior to the time of Jesus that 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. In plowing time and on harvest you shall rest. So some application points that we can do to pay attention to our rest, to sleep better, to try to rest better. Number one, you want to pay attention to your sleep. Pay attention to how you feel when you wake up. Pay attention to what time you lay down, even keeping a little journal or a little scratch pad with what time you're laying down and going to sleep, and what time you're waking up in the morning. Something to pay attention to is the quality of your sleep and trying to determine how well you sleep. Do you feel like you've tossed and turned? Do you feel like you've woken up several times throughout the night? Did you stress dream? Were there things that you felt were diminishing the quality of your sleep? When you notice what is happening, when you begin to take note, when you begin to be aware of what's going on, then you can start to make those little changes that will help to improve your sleep habits. The second thing you want to do is be observant about what stressors are in your life. Like I said earlier, we have to manage our stress, and it's hard to manage our stress if we don't know the things that are stressing us out. Not all stress is bad. But before we can begin to manage our stress, we have to be able to identify it. Once you can identify what you stress about, you can begin to look at and find ways to lessen that stress, or to compartmentalize, or to be able to put that stress into different areas of your life or different times of your day, and be able to orient your life around that to reduce those things and manage all of that stress, and begin to look at how you respond to that stress and how you deal with it or cope with it. The third thing that we can do is see if there are areas where we can increase our wellness. We want to look at our physical health, how we're working out. Are we getting a lot of physical energy? Are we getting a lot of physical energy out? Are we getting a lot of physical activity? Are we sitting at a desk all day? Just being aware of these things with our mental health and our emotional health too are also vital in living well lives, living whole lives, and trying to connect ourselves to greater sense of wholeness in all that we are. So I want to leave you real quick with a couple of comments to ponder, a couple of questions to ponder this week as we go out and as we move into our activity for this week, and as we move into our following lessons throughout the rest of these 10 weeks. Question number one that I would like you to ponder this week is to describe a major point of stress in your life that you experienced in the last week. So what has happened? What things have been going on in your life over the past week that have just really stressed you out? The second question I want you to think about is, when was the last time that you felt you were truly able to rest? When was the last time that you came down, that you got out of everything, that your emails were not bothering you, that you put your phone away and weren't looking at Instagram notifications or weren't looking at anything like that, and that you were truly able to rest and rejuvenate? Hope y'all have a great week. Thank you again for joining me. God bless you.